So today's lesson is going to be on what we call modes of nutrition. We're going to look at how plant versus animal cells acquire their energy, process it, etc. And then we'll look at the structure of both plant and animal cells due to the fact that there are obvious structural differences because of these modes of nutrition. Okay, if you're going to carry out photosynthesis, you've got to have the structures to carry out photosynthesis. If you're an animal, well, you don't do that, so you need different structures to help you digest food. Okay, so we'll be looking at how the modes of nutrition affect the structure of the cell. Okay, so we need to know and understand how plant and animal cells are different. We need to understand why those differences are present and necessary, and you will get a cell diagram today, and hopefully we will get it completely labeled, okay, before class is over. All right, so you'll be getting all of that stuff today. Okay, so modes of nutrition, 3 important words. Hopefully you will be highlighting those or underlining them or circling them, because they are words you're going to want to use when you answer certain questions on your unit exam, okay, because modes of nutrition is a big deal in terms of cell structure. Okay, so there's subtle differences between plant and animal cells, and is the different modes of nutrition where those biggest differences occur. Now, with a plant, okay, carrying out photosynthesis means that you have to do the following thing. You have to be able to take carbon dioxide and water and turn it into glucose and oxygen. Okay, that's photosynthesis written as a chemical reaction. Kind of looks like what kind of reaction? Yeah, except it's reversed, exactly. Because photosynthesis is the exact opposite of combustion. It is the thing that makes things that are combustible, right? Inside every one of your cells, inside every plant cell, is machinery that allows glucose, that C6H12O6, to be broken down in the presence of oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Okay, plants actually do that as well. Not only do they produce oxygen, okay, but they also metabolize the sugars they've produced in exactly the same process that our cells use, called cell respiration. Okay, cellular respiration is the opposite. Okay, it is essentially a combustion reaction, except there's no fires inside your cells, obviously. Okay, but the process is broken down, okay, kind of step by step, and we essentially break the bonds in glucose. Those bonds release energy, which can then be used to perform other tasks within the cell. All right, so this one's photosynthesis. Okay, this one is cell respiration. Both plants and animals use cellular respiration. You'll learn a lot more about those reactions in Bio 20. In fact, it's the first thing that you will learn about in Bio 20, okay, is all this stuff, because these are the reactions that make life on Earth possible. Okay? Without these, there'd be no carbon cycle, there'd be no life at all. Okay. All right, questions on those 2 reactions? Okay, so those 2 reactions require different machinery. Okay, photosynthesis, okay, requires chlorophyll, along with other photosynthetic pigments, but mainly chlorophyll. Okay, chlorophyll is the place, or is the material or chemical that allows this process to take place, capture energy from the sun, okay, and use it to break carbon dioxide, break water, and reassemble them into sugar and oxygen. Okay, cellular respiration requires mitochondria, which is why you see mitochondria in both plants and animals and fungus. Okay, you see them in all the major eukaryotic organisms. Okay, questions there? So it's these 2 reactions that are going to be the reason for, okay, all of the differences that we're going to observe, okay, between plant and animal cells, okay, among others. But all right, if you are an organism that must consume another organism for food, you are what we call a chemo heterotroph. Okay, Chemo meaning chemical, hetero meaning other, troph meaning feeder. You are a chemical other feeder. You need other organisms to feed you. Okay, so examples of that. Okay, an earthworm. Right, an earthworm will eat at least the remains of other organisms. Okay, organic material. Okay, that it will consume. Okay, a shark is an obvious predator. Okay, lions, tigers, bears. Okay, oh my, they're all going to be. Okay, chemo heterotrophs, right? A cow is a chemo heterotroph. Anything that consumes another living organism is a chemo heterotroph, including fungus. Okay, fungi do not carry out photosynthesis. They consume organic material for food, right? Which is why we see them growing on like old fruit, okay, old bread, things like that. They are actually consuming the material that is in there and using it for, excuse me, for energy. Okay, athlete's foot. Athlete's foot is a fungus. It's a parasitic fungus. It's itchy. You know why it's itchy? It's eating you, exactly. Okay, it is a parasitic fungus that is secreting digestive enzymes that are literally digesting your flesh and then using it for energy. And a bunch of you right now are wanting to scratch your feet. Okay, even though you don't have athlete's foot, it's just that thing, right? Okay, here's another one. There's a similar fungus that lives on your head. Causes dandruff if it gets out of control. How many of you really want to scratch your head right now? You're fighting the urge, okay? Yeah. All right, so there's lots of different fungi out there, okay? Some fungi are parasitic. They'll live on a living organism like athlete's foot, okay? And others just consume other organic material, usually is in a decomposing role, okay, for food. So they're requiring the organic matter from other organisms, living or dead, okay, for food. They are a chemo heterotroph, okay? Now, to be a chemo heterotroph, you need to have structures within your cells that can create and let's say harbor digestive enzymes. Okay? This is a bit of a problem because the material that an animal or fungus is made out of is the same material its food is made out of. So if you have these enzymes inside of your cells that are designed to eat the stuff you're made out of, that's a bit of a problem because they're going to want to eat you. Yeah. Okay. We have the same problem in our stomach. Okay. Inside of your stomach is hydrochloric acid and other digestive enzymes. Okay. They have to be essentially contained within our stomach by a layer of mucus, okay, that lines the stomach and protects the stomach from the things that want to eat stuff that are basically just like the tissue of our stomach. Right, so our stomach is constantly secreting this mucus lining, okay, that protects it from all of those acids and stuff. If something happens to that lining, what can you get? You can get an ulcer. Okay, an ulcer is really a chemical burn on the tissue inside your stomach. Right? So essentially the acids and digestive enzymes actually start to digest the inside of your stomach, okay? And that can be pretty harmful. It's uncomfortable, it makes you nauseous, gives you really bad heartburn. Sometimes it can even, if they get bad enough, they'll bleed, okay? And you'll see the blood, okay? Either in sputum or in your feces, okay? One way or the other. Yeah, it's pretty nasty stuff, okay? So if you are an organism that has to consume other organisms for food, you have to have a way to contain those enzymes so they don't go just about willy-nilly digesting all of your other stuff, okay? That means you need to have lysosomes, okay? Lysosomes are essentially the stomach of the cell. They can hold the digestive enzymes without being broken themselves, a special membrane for that, and that is where digestion occurs. Right? So food particles that are taken in by the cell will eventually find their way to a lysosome where they will be digested into simpler compounds that can be used by the cell. Okay, so lysosomes are membrane-enclosed organelles, okay, that contain digestive enzymes. All right, questions there? All right, so within animal cells, okay, we have certain structural features within the animal cell that allow animal cells to do the things they need to do. First off, they don't have a cell wall. They just have a cell membrane. That allows their shape to be much more flexible, allowing the animal to move efficiently and capture its food. Okay? Even if you're a cow, you're still capturing your food. Right? You are a predator of grass. Okay? If a blade of grass sees a cow coming, believe me, if it could feel fear, it would. Right? So their cells have to be flexible in order to facilitate this change in shape that goes on. Right? So also, being flexible means flexible, not breakable. We don't want the cell to rip and tear when it changes shape. So within there is usually something called a cytoskeleton. Okay? And a cytoskeleton isn't bones. Okay, I want you to think it's bones. Cyto means cell, so this like skeleton of the cell, but it's actually like fibers and tubules that are very elastic that attach to different points on the inside of the membrane. Right? So as the cell changes shape, these are like a bungee cord almost that allows the cell to stretch only a certain distance before kind of pulling it back, and that prevents the cell from breaking most of the time. Okay? Some cells are still going to break, but they're not always going to break. What's that? Yeah, I mean, a tendon is made of many cells, but it's similar in function, if not in structure. Yeah. All right. And then we have obviously the lysosomes. Okay, those are in here. The lysosomes are what we talked about a minute ago. Okay, that's where the digestion takes place. A peroxisome is very much like a lysosome, except it doesn't have food in it yet. It does have the digestive enzymes in it, but it hasn't merged with a food particle and started any digestion. All right, and then other structures that are within the animal cell are very similar to the plant cell. Okay, so the big thing here is that we have to have the cytoskeleton, okay, because there is need for mobility. There's need for flexibility and mobility, right? So they often contain fibrous materials that allow the cell to change shape. Okay, within your muscle cells, okay, there's even more of these things. They're typically called actin and myosin fibers, okay, or muscle fibers, and you actually intentionally break them all the time. Okay? But when they heal back stronger. And generally when they heal back stronger, they heal back a little bit bigger. Okay? That's how you build muscle. Okay? The more times you break these fibers, the more times they heal back together, the bigger and stronger they become each and every time. Okay. Now, your muscles are special. They have really a lot thicker fibers and a lot more other stuff inside that allows them to do that. Okay, but it's similar to that. They're elastic and they allow the cell to change shape. All right, and then also animal cells have only a flexible membrane as their outer border, no cell wall. Now, fungi, on the other hand, even though they have lysosomes and they digest other organisms for food, they do have a cell wall. Okay, because they don't have any need for mobility. So they have a cell wall that goes around the outside, okay, that helps them to maintain their shape. Right? So they are a chemo heterotroph that actually does have a cell wall. But when we're talking about just animals, okay, we're talking about cells with no wall. Okay, if you carry out photosynthesis as your mode of nutrition, then you are a photoautotroph. Photo meaning light, auto meaning self, troph meaning feeder. Okay, so you use light to feed yourself if you are a photosynthetic organism. Okay, so they capture sunlight. Using its power, they remove carbon from carbon dioxide to produce sugar for energy by photosynthesis. Okay, so plant cells have to have this special organelle right here, chloroplasts. They will have many chloroplasts inside of them. In fact, when we do our cell anatomy lab next week, where you're going to be looking at different plant cells, you will actually be able to see the chloroplasts. Okay? They'll be slightly ovoid, kind of grayish green structures within the cell, and there'll be a fair amount of them. Okay, because cells that carry out photosynthesis, okay, that are on kind of the top layer of leaves, are absolutely packed with chloroplasts in order to do their job. Okay, a chloroplast, like we said, is kind of ovoid. Okay, and inside, not that you would see these, are what are called thylakoids. They're kind of like, they almost look like stacks of like poker chips or checkers or coins, okay, something like that. Okay, inside, and that's where the machinery of photosynthesis is. Okay, the chlorophyll is in there. Okay, when chlorophyll gets excited, we talked about this in the chem unit, the electrons move from lower levels to higher levels, and then when the light is gone, they drop back down. Okay, and when they drop back down, they release the energy they gained, and that's the energy that's used to carry out photosynthesis. All right, also, plants have to support long stems. They have to be able to get fairly tall, so they need to be able to support their cells with a cell wall and large vacuoles filled with water. Okay? So the cell supports itself from the outside with a frame, that's the cell wall, and from the inside with water pressure, that's the water vacuole. Okay? So it would be the equivalent of if you were like inside of a box with a big balloon, okay? And somebody continued to blow up this balloon while you were inside the box, okay? Is the balloon eventually going to start to push on the box, right? It's going to squish you inside, okay? That's how a cell supports itself. It has this rigid frame, the box, the cell wall, and then it has this water vacuole inside that pushes from the inside, okay, to maintain structure and pressure as well. This is why after a while, if you haven't watered a plant like this one, okay, the leaves start to get wilty, right? They don't look as healthy as maybe like these leaves over here, okay? They start to wilt. They're wilting because the water vacuoles have been emptied. And now there isn't enough pressure to push against the cell wall and hold it upright. The cell wall by itself can't support the cell. It needs to work in conjunction with that water vacuole. Okay? Sort of makes sense? Okay, so plant and animal cells have more similarities than they do differences, but today we're focusing on the differences because they have to do with how they get their food. All right, so from an evolutionary point of view, okay, we've talked about how that likely means that they came from a common ancestor. Okay, and again, I will talk about how that doesn't contradict what you're going to learn in religion class, but I'm doing that later on in the unit when I've gone over some other things too. Okay. So we've got then the nucleus, they both have one of those, right? That's kind of this structure here. Okay, they have a nucleolus, which is that little structure inside of there. Okay, they've got rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is this stuff around the outside. They have a lot of stuff in common. Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, okay, cytoplasm, that's the fluid in the cell. All of that stuff is common to all of them. They have far more in common in terms of structure and process than they have that are different. Okay, questions there? All right. Okay, gonna have you guys write some answers down for those real quick, and then I'm gonna give you your cell diagrams, and we'll go over those. Okay, let's quickly just go over these here. Main reason for the differences between plant and animal cells, 3 words. Modes of nutrition, absolutely. Okay, that's the main reason for the differences. They have different modes of nutrition. Okay, question number 2, what organelle supplies plants with energy? What process does it use? Hannah, what is it? Okay, so chlorophyll is within the chloroplast, right? Okay, and it uses what process, Kevin? Nope. Photosynthesis. Okay. What organelle supplies animal cells with energy? How does it do this? The lysosome, okay, and it carries out digestion, which then leads to the mitochondria, which carries out cellular respiration. Okay. All right, for number 4 here, transport within plant and animal cells is done in the same fashion. That is, they use the same processes, which we'll go over next week. Okay, why would this be kept the same, evolutionarily speaking, like for like a billion years? Okay, when so many other things have been altered. Okay, the only reason a process would hang around is because it works. Okay, very simply, from an evolutionary perspective, having something better come along is rare. All right. If this process works, that means basically that nothing better, no better way to transport materials has come along in all that time. Okay. Especially since not only does this way that they use, which is called diffusion, okay, to transport materials work really well, it's free. It doesn't cost the cell any energy to use it. All right, so that is definitely something that would be kept the same. All right, so from a kind of survival of the fittest, natural selection kind of point of view, okay, most of the time when there's a change in an organism, that change is negative, and most of the time that organism doesn't reproduce well or survive at all, and as a result, its genes don't get passed on. Okay, that's how natural selection works. If you have some sort of structure, mutation, or whatever that makes you better suited to your environment, then you will reproduce more often, and that gene will end up in your gene pool more often, and pretty soon, slowly, not pretty soon, slowly, okay, your species changes. All right, so that's how natural selection leads to evolution. Natural selection selects individual organisms. Evolution shows the changes that are caused in a species because of that. Okay, very simple example would be if, not that this would happen, but if there was like a pack of coyotes near Okotoks here, and they all had incredible night vision. Okay, would they survive and reproduce better than the pack across town that can't see at night? Yes. So pretty soon, all the coyotes around Okotoks would have good night vision. Okay, like within a few generations, they would essentially weed out the others because they would be able to outcompete them for food. They can hunt 24 hours a day, right? Anytime they want, whereas the others can only hunt during the day. Okay, that's definitely superior. That's really simple and obviously a bit far-fetched, but that's how natural selection works. Okay. All right. For number 5, nutritional needs of plants and animals are very different. Which would survive best in a primordial, that's very early Earth, that had very little oxygen or organic material? Exactly. Okay. And in fact, in the fossil record, we don't really see any organisms that are not able to produce their own food using light until like hundreds of millions of years later. Okay. Photosynthetic organisms were definitely the first ones here because not only could they use the resources that were here, they could produce their own oxygen to help burn the sugar they needed. Okay, because without oxygen, cellular respiration doesn't work. Okay, they were actually able to produce the oxygen required to burn the sugar they were producing through photosynthesis. Okay. All right, questions on those? Let's label our cells. Start with the animal cell. Okay, we're going to start right here with this little bubble that appears to be empty. Okay, it only appears to be empty because there's no food in it. But there are digestive enzymes in it. Thus, this is a peroxisome. Okay, it is the precursor to a lysosome. Okay, we call it a lysosome once food has entered it and the digestive process has begun. All right, I'm going to go clockwise around the cell. So we're looking at this forked set of lines here, and they are touching these thin, fibrous-looking structures. This would be part of the cell's what? Not the membrane, that's the outer part. Cytoskeleton, right. Okay, there's actually different parts to the cytoskeleton. Those would be the microfibers, okay, that are part of the cytoskeleton. Okay, this forked line down here is also pointing at the cytoskeleton. These are thicker fibers called microtubules. Okay, but cytoskeleton is good enough for all of them because on a lot of diagrams you can't really tell the difference. Okay. All right, sorry, back to going clockwise. This sausage-shaped structure I showed you yesterday actually as one of the pictures for scanning transmission electron microscopy. Okay, this is the thing that that breaks down sugar, okay, in cellular respiration. Starts with M, mitochondria. Okay. Okay, so the mitochondria breaks down sugar for energy. Okay, you don't necessarily have to have the functions on here. We're going to talk about the functions of everything next week. I'm just telling you what they do for today. All right, for some reason, every cell diagram of an animal cell includes this, which is odd because 99% of all animal cells don't have one of those. Okay, really the only animal cells that would have that would be a sperm cell. Okay, which means that only half of you in the room are actually capable of having these cells. Okay, so this thing is called a flagellum. Okay, it's a whip-like tail that certain cells can use to move. A euglena has one. Okay, you looked at a euglena yesterday. Sperm have them. Okay, but they're actually quite rare. There's only a few organisms that actually have them. I don't know why it's always on there. I guess they have to say this is sometimes there, so we're putting it on the diagram. I don't know. Okay, the big purple structure. Sorry, question? This is a generalized animal cell. Yeah, because actually a sperm cell would lack a lot of these structures. Okay, because it's a very short-lived cell with one purpose, right? Swim, fertilize the egg, done. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we've got the big structure here in the middle, okay, which is the nucleus, but this is pointing at the outside of it, What would we call the outside of any structure that's cell-related? Starts with M. Membrane. This is the nuclear membrane specifically. Okay. The nuclear membrane is actually a bit different, quite a bit different from the cell membrane. Okay. Chemically speaking, they're made of the same stuff, but the way that they're put together is quite different. Okay. The nuclear membrane is more of a double layer as opposed to a single layer for the cell. And stuff doesn't move through the membrane except through holes in it called nuclear pores, which are these things here. They're not labeled on the diagram, but that's what those little spots are. They're nuclear pores. They open and close. The only thing that they allow in or out is genetic material. Okay, you have to consider that what's inside the nucleus is the most important stuff the cell has. Okay, it is the instructions for doing, making everything. Okay, if any part of that gets damaged, the cell will likely die. Right, so it has to protect that stuff at all costs, which is why it allows very little in or out. Okay, so the nuclear membrane is basically a non-permeable structure. Okay, so next line is pointing at just the nucleus. And then the structure below that, the big purple dot in the middle, is the nucleolus. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. Nucleolus. Okay. Now, what is the nucleus? If you say brain of the cell, I might throttle you, by the way, so don't say that. Okay. What does the nucleus do? It holds DNA, and that's all it does. There's this idea out there that people are like, it's the brain of the cell. Well, God, it's not the brain of the cell. Okay, it's not a brain. A brain is made of many cells, many. Okay, and has like neurons and synapses and stuff like that. This is not a brain. Okay, this is a library. It holds all of the information necessary for the cell to do what it needs to do, and that is all. Okay, the nucleus doesn't actively control anything. Okay? It just holds the genetic information. The nucleolus, on the other hand, does a fair amount of manipulation. Okay? Its main job is that it controls the synthesis of protein. Right? Your cell is always having to make different kinds of proteins. And the nucleolus is like the librarian. Okay? The nucleus is the library, the nucleolus is the librarian. It knows where all the information is. So if the cell says to it, we need insulin right now, the nucleolus knows exactly where the instructions for making insulin are. It goes to them, it finds them, and it makes a copy of them. It doesn't send out the original. Okay? If it sent out the original, your copy of the DNA, and say, oh, here you go, this is the book that tells you how to make it, it won't get that book back. And then your cell won't be able to make insulin anymore, and it'll die. Okay? So it only makes a copy, it sends out the copy. If it gets the copy back, great. If it doesn't, no big deal. All right, so the nucleolus controls the synthesis of proteins. Okay, on the note of synthesis of proteins, we have this little forked line here that is pointing at the little dots that are floating free and the little dots attached to this blue stuff. The little dots are what make protein, and they are called ribosomes. Okay, the structure here that you very often find around the nucleus, okay, that has all these little dots on it, is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. You can abbreviate that ER, so rough ER. Okay. The rough ER is always around the nucleus. There's always a lot of it there because when the cell's making proteins, it doesn't want the information to have to go very far. It wants to be able to get that stuff done quickly, and the rough ER transports the proteins that the ribosomes make. Okay? So that's its job, is to transport the proteins that they make. Right? In fact, this is one of the structures you'll be able to see when we look at cells under the microscope. Okay? When you find the nucleus, look for the nucleus's goatee. Okay, it'll actually look like the nucleus has a little pointy beard coming off of it. That's usually the rough ER. Okay, just kind of a hazy structure around one side of it. Okay, down below that, okay, we see an arrow here pointing at the outside of the cell, which would be the cell membrane. Okay, now the cell membrane controls movement in and out of the cell. The technical term for that is endocytosis, that's into the cell, and exocytosis, that's out of the cell. All right, it's not like it's not a wall. Okay, it doesn't really keep the shape at all because it's quite flexible in its shape. It just controls the entry and exit of material through a lot of different processes that we'll learn next week. All right, a little further over here, we see this stuff that looks like the rough ER, except it doesn't have any ribosomes on it. So by comparison, it's not rough, it's smooth. Okay, so this is the smooth ER. The smooth ER has many jobs. Okay, it can produce hormones, it breaks down complex carbohydrates. So if you had like rice or pasta, okay, your smooth ER would be breaking down the starches in that, or potatoes. Okay, it'll break down the starch. It can detoxify poisons. That's its main job, actually, is to detoxify poisons. So if you ingested something that's toxic, okay, that's the organelle that does a lot of the breaking down of that material. Okay. So yeah, it's got a lot of jobs, very important organelle, and there's a lot of it. But because it's not covered with anything, you rarely ever see it through a light microscope. It's virtually transparent. So it's not a structure you would likely see or label on a cell diagram. Okay, then we have this orange structure here, and that is the Golgi apparatus. That is the waste processing plant of the cell. All wastes eventually go in one side and come out packaged out the other. All right, so it has a cis face, that's the receiving side, and a trans face, that's the shipping side. Okay, wastes come in and they get put into a little vesicle, which is like almost its own little cell. The vesicle is made out of membrane material. Okay, that membrane material will then go over to the cell membrane, and when it touches the cell membrane, it just pops, and the waste goes out of the cell, and then the rest of it just becomes part of the cell membrane. Okay? It's a pretty efficient process that helps limit the amount of contact that the waste has with the inside of the cell and gets it out of the cell quickly. All right, then we have this little structure here. Okay, so it looks like the peroxisome, except it's got stuff in it. That's why it's a lysosome. So digestion is actually going on in that structure there. Okay, these little structures here that look like kind of toothed wheels or gears, okay, what's that? Yeah, they do kind of look like pasta, okay, like corkscrew pasta kind of, okay. These are the centrioles. Only animal cells have these, and they have them because they can change shape. That is, the cell can change shape. So if the cell is dividing, it needs these centrioles there to make sure that the DNA gets to the right cell. Because if the cell changes shape while it's dividing, it would be possible that too much would end up in one side and not enough would end up in the other. So the centrioles go essentially to the poles of the cell, and they send out little fibers that attach to your chromosomes, and they pull the chromosomes apart and make sure that they end up on the right sides of the cell during cell division. A plant doesn't need this because a plant cell won't change shape during division. Okay, it stays square. All right, we got to add one little line because it's not in here. Put it to any blank spot within the cell that looks blank. Okay, and this is going to be the cytoplasm. Okay, the cytoplasm is the fluid material that fills up the cell. Cells are filled with fluid, not air. Okay, they're filled with air, all the organelles would sit on the bottom of the cell. Right, so this fluid material facilitates diffusion. Diffusion is that process that cells use to move materials back and forth within the cell. Without that watery material inside, it wouldn't work. Okay. All right, questions on the animal cell? Ooh, I don't know if we're going to get through the plant cell, but luckily, most of the structures in the plant cell are the same, so we'll concentrate on the ones that are different. All right, big blue thing. Water, don't label it big blue thing. Okay, water vacuole. Right, we talked about that already. It helps support the shape of the cell from inside, pushing up. Okay, it has a special membrane because there's a lot of pressure in there from the water. Okay, that's this line here. That's called a tonoplast. Okay, we have our chloroplasts. So the big green thing down here in the bottom right corner. Okay, bottom left-hand corner, we see that the cell wall, that's the orange thing, so we'll label that cell wall, is cut away so we can see the cell membrane. Just because a plant cell has the cell wall doesn't mean it doesn't have a cell membrane. In fact, it has to, because a cell wall is not an opaque structure like we see it here. It's actually a fibrous frame with holes in it. Okay, so it would look like a house that's just being built and they haven't put the plywood on the outside. It's just framed. You could walk through all the walls. Okay, that's what the cell wall is like. It's just a frame, not really a impenetrable wall. Okay, so it doesn't protect the cell at all. It just holds its shape. The cell membrane is what protects. Okay, so that's the cell membrane. And membrane. Okay, and then scratch this one off because that structure shouldn't be in there. Okay. Plant cells do not have peroxisomes because they don't digest food. Okay, the rest are the same, so you're good to go from there. We'll talk about the rest on Monday. Venus flytrap will be able to secrete, it's got special cells that do secrete digestive enzymes. Not so much in the same way though, different structures, yeah. Yeah,